The biggest little in-joke the MMA community has had over the last year or so has easily been this weird obsession that the UFC, and more specifically Dana White, has with calling Jon Jones the greatest mixed martial artist of all time. Now, on the face of it, the argument seems pretty convincing. The youngest ever UFC champion, 28 wins with his only loss coming by way of DQ for a rule that doesn't even apply anymore, and of course a two-weight champion. But if you ask any MMA fan, you'd quickly find out that there is definitely not a consensus on who the GOAT really is. Even in my video where I list out the GOAT of every combat sport, I picked Georges St. Pierre for MMA's GOAT. And as this conversation has come back into MMA culture, I've been hearing many people suggest Demetrious Johnson and even Khabib for shouts for this title. And there will always be people who consider the impact on the sport itself, which makes it hard to go past someone like Royce Gracie. In any case, all of these names were made in the UFC, so why is it that the organisation is so proactive in pushing their belief that Jon Jones is the GOAT above their stars of yesteryear, especially when considering that Jones isn't exactly the best ambassador for the sport? There of course could be the genuine belief that Dana White believes Jon Jones is the GOAT, which definitely isn't a bad take, but the extent to which this notion is pandered on leads me to believe that there are many other motivating factors to this. Well, in this video I'm going to list out every reason I can think of to explain this quite frankly weird happening in MMA. The first and most pressing reason is that Jones is still active. Therefore, pushing the narrative that he is the greatest of all time is simply a marketing ploy. Every other name in contention is retired, such as GSP and Mighty Mouse, or simply never fought in the UFC, like Fedor Emelianenko. If you can reach a casual audience and tell them that there is this chance to watch the greatest to ever do it, I'm sure that there is a particular subsection of the casual market that would be more likely to watch a UFC product. Pushing this narrative also helps legitimize the UFC as the current world leader of MMA in terms of talent, and also legitimize and grow the sport in the greater sports landscape. The symbol of an active greatest of all time has been used countless times in sports to help grow a particular league or sport, because, without a doubt, there is a certain allure to watching the greatest perform. Here are some examples: Michael Jordan for the NBA in the 1990s, or even LeBron in the late 2000s, Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo in football, Usain Bolt in track and field and the Olympics as an event, Tom Brady in the NFL, the Big Three in tennis, even Tiger Woods with golf and Muhammad Ali with boxing. All of these athletes grew the popularity of their respective sports and leagues exponentially, heavily through the foundation of being the greatest while still active. The UFC is trying to replicate this tactic with Jones, who is the only active fighter who could conceivably be considered the GOAT. To anyone who watches Dana White, how he speaks and operates the organization, it's pretty clear that he doesn't hide his personal feelings on fighters, whether that be a positive or negative opinion. And unfortunately for Dana, he isn't exactly on the greatest of terms with the best fighters his organization has produced. Looking at GSP for example, Dana has publicly expressed his annoyance at Georges St. Pierre for only returning for one fight when he captured the middleweight title against Michael Bisping in 2017. Especially considering the sporting integrity the UFC sacrificed when interim champion Robert Whittaker was skipped over just so GSP could return straight to a title shot and headline Madison Square Garden. After GSP made it clear he won't be defending the belt, the UFC was left without a champion, their sporting integrity questioned, and many high potential selling fights gone. So fair enough, if I was in Dana's shoes, I probably wouldn't be singing GSP's praises as the GOAT every week. And with Demetrious Johnson, it has always been clear that Dana was never too fond of him either, whether that be through threatening to cut his whole division while he was champion, making him defend his title on fight nights and tough finale cards, therefore excluding him out of pay-per-view points typical for a champion, or simply trading him for Ben Askren, who he has also publicly expressed disdain for. Funnily enough, Dana has actually been on record calling Mighty Mouse the GOAT, but clearly the flyweight's habit of speaking up against the organization and what seems to be some prejudice against the guy has made this opinion go away very quickly. When you eliminate Mighty Mouse and GSP, you don't have many other options on who the GOAT could actually be. There are many arguments against Jones being the GOAT. His strength of competition is severely overrated, facing most of his opponents outside of their prime. He has also 3 fights that could be argued as losses that went his way via decision, but nothing quite taints his legacy more than his proven use of banned performance-enhancing substances. For me personally, that automatically excludes Jones from any conversations surrounding the greatest of all time, especially when there are other options who never got caught, and therefore no one has any foundational evidence to suggest they used PEDs. Quite simply, if you are caught for cheating in a sport to this degree, you can't be the greatest of all time in that sport, in my opinion. And I know many people share that same sentiment. However, for the UFC and Dana, they are in a funky situation where they kind of have to sacrifice their sporting integrity by ignoring Jones's violations, and still carry on by calling him the greatest to ever compete in the sport. Otherwise, they would have to throw Jones under the bus, where they could redeem some sporting integrity and openly communicate that Jones' violations are a blemish on his legacy and that he can't be the GOAT. The UFC, however, realized that sporting integrity isn't particularly monetizable in MMA, and having an active fighter you're promoting as the GOAT is very monetizable in comparison. It's also an issue of sweeping the very real PED issues in MMA under the rug. Obviously, Dana isn't going to be coming out and reminding everyone of the checkered relationship one of their biggest stars has with PEDs, and therefore put into question if the organization has or had a PED problem. Simply ignoring it and hoping it goes away and that the fans forget is the path of least resistance of this image problem, while actively promoting Jones as the GOAT is a symbol of the UFC stance that PED usage was never a serious threat to the organization's sporting integrity. This also leads to our next point. Jon Jones is a very polarizing figure, and like the old saying goes, any attention is good attention. Having a team of Jon Jones haters being riled up by Dana White spewing on every week about how he is the GOAT is one of the easiest ways to drive engagement to the UFC's products. People like me will create videos on the subject, and people will start and participate in arguments relating to this subject on social media. Exploiting this Jon Jones hatred and adding fuel to this artificial controversy just brings more attention to Jones, ensuring that even his biggest haters are going to know when his next fight is, and ensure that they are very likely going to watch it, even if it's just to watch him lose. As of writing, Jones is one of 2 American UFC champions, the other being Belal Muhammad. So yeah, let's just consider Jones to be the only American UFC champion. The UFC being an American organization that holds a majority of its events in America, with a majority of its fans and sponsors being American, do genuinely benefit from having an American champion, and bonus points if that champion is the GOAT. As it stands with the multinational nature of the UFC and its champions, it's great for both the organization and the sport in general. Having so many champions from all over the world breeds new fans and a new pool of fighters. But for the UFC itself, there is something there about having a popular American champion while in this phase of global expansion. While the UFC is a global operation, an American champion helps maintain that resonance with its largest and most engaged fan base, and just helps anchor the UFC as the pinnacle of the sport as an American organization. Jon Jones is just a fantastic family man, and his values are a great representation of the sport and the organization. Just kidding. But seriously, maybe the organization and Dana White have a soft spot for Jones. He has been with them for over a decade at this point, but I think from an objective viewpoint, the organization just can't be too fond of the guy. I mean, for all the reasons listed above, he is a nightmare for the UFC. Thinking of all the controversy and criticism he brings to the organization, how his PED usage next to ruin their largest event with UFC 200, and I'm sure if the UFC had any other option to use the GOAT narrative, being a popular, currently active fighter, bonus points if they are American and don't have a dodgy track record, they would take it in a heartbeat. So there we have it. That's all the reasons I have as to why the UFC is so heavily pushing this narrative that Jon Jones is the GOAT, even if the debate is not as clear-cut as they would make it seem. As I mentioned earlier, I believe getting caught for using PEDs automatically puts you out of contention, but that's just my opinion. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this notion, who your GOAT is, or if you think this whole thing is just irrelevant. Thank you all as always for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.